Pacifistic utopianism. A world without war, run in an ideal fashion. It sounds, gosh, golly, wonderful, doesn't it? If only we could get over our humanity and our human failings, which bring about the constant need for struggle against one another, which bring about poverty and which bring about hardship. If only we could. And it's this pacifistic utopian ideal that motivates Woodrow Wilson as he sets up the Treaty of Versailles. Instead of three empires ruling in Eastern Europe, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Russian Empire, along with the Ottoman Empire and a few Balkan states here, what Wilson wants to do is he wants to solve the problem of nationalism by giving every national culture its own nation state, even if it's a tiny little state. Austria is an exception. We've talked about that because you don't want to reward Germany for losing the war. The Czechs and the Slovaks are very different people, but put them together because you got to be somewhat pragmatic about having a country that's capable of surviving and exporting itself. Hungary without Transylvania. Yugoslavia is a combination of the Serbs, the Croats, the Slovenes, and others in this Balkan region of deep divisions. The Poles get their country back, but they take territory from everyone around them, so everyone's angry with Poland. The Czechs, the Germans, the Lithuanians, the Russians, the Ukrainians, the White Russians, they're all angry at Poland. You got Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. You got Finland. They're small. Finland's still around, so Finland is actually viable. But Wilson countenances the creation of these microstates because he's an idealist. He believes that they will make the world a better place by preventing such a rational thing, such a college professor sort of thing. By preventing the rationale for war, by preventing solving all the problems of nationhood in Europe, as many as he could, he will prevent war from needing to happen, from needing to take place. But what it leads to is what is called Balkanization. And what Balkanization is a reference to the Balkan Peninsula. And the Balkan Peninsula is a multiculturalist's joyous dream because in this area, from Greece, Albania, the former Yugoslavia, which includes Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, Slovenia, the Bulgars, the Romanians, the Transylvanians, the Hungarians, the Czechs, the Slovaks, this whole area here, but particularly the area of Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Albania, this area has every town, every city, neighborhood, every country, village divided between people of different religions, different ethnicities. Ain't diversity grand? Well, the truth is, in good times, diversity works enough and that people tolerate one another, but in bad times, people blame one another. They hate one another, they distrust one another, and they start massacring one another. The Balkanization of Central Europe creates power vacuums that are ultimately going to invite the next generation of predators, Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, Fascist Italy, and others, to sup, to eat dinner, to gobble up these microstates, these Balkanized countries. In other words, in terms of Wilson's solution to the nationalist problem, these microstates make sense, especially if there's a League of Nations with strong capacities to collect towards collective security. It all makes sense. But according to the traditional power politics that have governed Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world for as long as people have been writing down history, this is an invitation to trouble. The League of Nations should have been capable of providing a sense of collective security. Any country that's an aggressor if Switzerland, the crazy Swiss, decide to fight the French, not that they would, but if they did, all the world would go in against Switzerland. That was the idea. That the entire world, the entire league would come together, and that everyone who was not the aggressor would side with the aggressor's victim, and that would prevent. It's like imagine a playground where all the non-bullies, once they saw a bully acting out, would gang up on the bully and effectively stop him. You've seen that happen again and again, haven't you, in life? You haven't? Why? Because it doesn't usually happen, does it? There are reasons for this, reasons that are pretty obvious psychologically. It's much easier to watch the bully victimize someone else than to step up and say, I'm next, which is what you do when you try to organize an opposition to this bully. But it might have worked. Had the United States, with its economic power, its potential military power, its vigor, the fact that it hadn't lost an entire generation of aggressive and ambitious young men, had that all been part of the league? Yeah, it might have worked. But it wasn't, because Wilson did not involve his political opponents. Wilson's disdain for his political opponents within the United States cost him a bipartisan Treaty of Versailles and cost him American membership in the League of Nations, which dooms the League of Nations and really dooms the idea of collective security, because the British are fatigued, the French are exhausted, and the US has gone isolationist. But the idea of pacifistic utopianism does grow throughout this period. For example, there's the great Geneva Convention on how to take care of prisoners of war. This is where you get the famous name, rank, and serial number. Because that's all a prisoner is obliged to give his captor. Under the Geneva Convention, a bunch of lawyers and philosophers and political scientists got together, and with diplomats, they decided how the next war should be fought for prisoners. Make sure the prisoners get the same basic diet as a soldier of your country. If you have prisoners, they should basically get the same diet as your soldiers or your civilians. If you have prisoners, you shouldn't torture them, you shouldn't abuse them, you shouldn't interrogate them in a hardcore way, because torture is bad. Can't do torture. No, what we've got to do is have a world that's better than that. So the Geneva Convention on the Treatment of Prisoners of War mandates a series of lifestyle minimums that prisoners are going to get, including the right to not tell the enemy what your plans are, to only say your name, your rank, your serial number, because the enemy needs to be able to track you, so that a neutral party can ask who your prisoners are, and you can say, okay, it's these people. These people have given me their name, their rank, their serial number. However, in reality, if you're in a battle and you've got enemy soldiers that know the enemy's battle plan, their weaknesses, and your men's life are on the line and victory is on the line, you might not be willing to follow all of the stipulations of the Geneva Convention. In fact, the only two countries on Earth that really follow the Geneva Convention's spirit as well as letter are the United States of America and the British. The French surrender early on, and the Free French tend to be pretty hardcore. The Germans, no. They put on a show of providing Geneva Convention protections to the British and French, but again, to the Russians, no, they use them like slave labor. They just killed them outright. And as to the Russians and the Japanese, they use rape and torture as a daily occurrence to maintain power over the people they conquer, including prisoners of war. We'll go into that more later. There's also, not mentioned on here, the Locarno Treaty. And what the Locarno Treaty does is it has all the countries of Western Europe agree to the frontiers of Western Europe at the end of World War I. So Alsace-Lorraine is French, the Germans accept this, but there is no Eastern Locarno. There is no Locarno Treaty that has all the parties involved say, yep, these are the borders that should be, these are the borders that we want. The Locarno Treaty is supposed to, again, rationally prevent the pretext for war by having all parties accept that the borders are as the borders should be. But there is no Locarno for this chaos, crazy quilt of Central European patchwork states that Versailles creates. A world court is actually set up before this period, in the period of, I think it's 1906, but it's in the period before the Great War, before World War I. It's set up in The Hague in Holland. And who does it make up? Well, a bunch of international judges and jurists. Who appointed them? Well, they appointed themselves. Did I vote for anyone, or did any one of my ancestors vote for anyone to help set this court up? No. So they have jurisdiction because they say they have jurisdiction, but they don't have jurisdiction from the national constitution of any of the countries. The League of Nations gives them credibility, and the United Nations, its successor, gives them some credibility in that it takes the judgments of the International Court at The Hague seriously. But the truth is, this starts out as a group of idealists saying that we are the judges of all actions around the world, and if there are war crimes or if there is evil doing, we will put the perpetrators on trial and we will create this thing called international law, because up until now, international law has been Darwin's law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. It's an idealistic notion. And like any cat leash, it works only so long as the cat muckles on to that leash. The moment the cat lets go, it doesn't work. The cat's not going to cooperate if it doesn't want to cooperate. There's an old saying, it takes two to fight. No, it doesn't. It takes one to fight. If you are faced with an aggressor, you have a few choices. You can run and hope you're faster than the aggressor. You can surrender and let the aggressor abuse you and hope for the mercy of this aggressive bully. Or you can fight. The opposite of war is usually not peace. It's surrender. When faced with an aggressor, when faced with somebody who wants what's yours and is willing to hurt you or destroy you in order to take it, talking only works if they want to talk. Diplomacy only works if they are interested in compromise. If they're not, forget about it. It's like appealing to a bully who's pounding on you. It only works if the bully decides, I've had enough. The World Court's decisions work in countries that like the idea of an international code of justice. But the aggressors of the world then and now could care less what a group of self-appointed peaceniks think in Holland. They're going to do what they are going to do, and the only way to stop them is to fight them. They're bullies on a grand scale. Part of this idea of pacifism, pacifistic utopianism, is the Washington Naval Conference, which we'll get to next time.